The first tear fell before anyone noticed her hands were shaking. It slipped down the weathered lines of her cheek and landed on the cracked pavement outside Rosie's diner, where the neon sign buzzed and flickered like it couldn't quite decide whether to stay alive. Eleanor Whitmore stood there clutching a small paper bag to her chest, shoulders hunched, lips trembling. She was 76 years old, deaf since childhood, and on that cold afternoon she felt smaller than she ever had before. Smaller than the diner, smaller than the laughter spilling through its doors, smaller than the world that seemed determined to rush past her without seeing her at all. Eleanor had come to the diner for one simple reason: warmth. Her apartment's heating had been unreliable all winter, and the diner's glowing windows promised a few precious minutes of comfort. She didn't plan to eat. She never did. Money was tight since her husband passed, and pride still mattered to her. She liked to sit by the window, sip free water, and watch people, imagining their conversations, their lives, their joys. But today, before she could even open the door, a group of teenagers on the sidewalk noticed her. They noticed her thick glasses, her outdated coat, the way she spoke to the cashier through the glass with careful, exaggerated lip movements and trembling hands. They laughed, not the nervous kind, not the accidental kind, the cruel kind that rings sharp and hollow. One of them pulled out a phone. Eleanor didn't hear the words, but she saw the expressions: mocking mouths, raised eyebrows, eyes that gleamed with delight at someone else's discomfort. A boy exaggeratedly flapped his hands, mimicking sign language without knowing a single real sign. Another girl pointed at Eleanor's coat and doubled over laughing. Eleanor tried to step away, but her foot caught on the curb. The paper bag fell, spilling a small sandwich she had saved for later onto the dirty ground. The laughter grew louder, more animated. The phone followed her as she bent to pick up the sandwich, her fingers trembling so badly she couldn't grasp it. When she finally looked up, her eyes met the camera lens, and something inside her broke. Tears came then, fast and unstoppable. She turned her face away, ashamed of her weakness, ashamed that at her age she still hadn't learned how to make cruelty hurt less. The teens didn't stop filming. They leaned closer, feeding off the moment, eager to capture pain they could later replay for likes and laughs. Inside the diner, people noticed. Some glanced through the window, frowned, then looked back at their plates. A waitress hesitated behind the counter, wiping the same spot over and over. A middle-aged man shook his head but stayed seated. No one moved. Eleanor stood alone, crying silently in a world that had sound but no voice for her. What Eleanor didn't know was that just down the road, the low thunder of motorcycle engines was approaching, rolling closer like a distant storm. The diner sat along a highway popular with traveling bikers, and that afternoon a group of riders had stopped nearby for fuel. They were men and women of different ages, leather jackets worn soft with time, patches stitched with memories rather than menace. Among them was Jack Bear Hollis, a broad-shouldered man with a gray beard and eyes that had seen more pain than he liked to admit. He noticed the teenagers first, their laughter, their phones raised. Then he saw Eleanor. Something in Jack's chest tightened. Maybe it was because his own mother had been deaf. Maybe it was because he'd learned long ago what it felt like to be judged on sight alone. Without saying a word, he killed his engine and swung his leg off the bike. One by one, the others followed, the sudden silence of stopped engines drawing attention. Boots hit the pavement. Leather creaked. The laughter faltered. The teens turned, their smiles fading as they took in the sight of half a dozen bikers walking toward them. The phones lowered slightly. Jack didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. He simply stood between Eleanor and the teenagers, his presence solid and immovable, like a wall that had decided it was done letting harm pass through. Eleanor noticed the change immediately. She felt it in the way the air shifted, in the sudden stillness. She looked up, confused, and saw the bikers, faces serious, eyes focused not with anger but with something steadier: protection. Jack crouched slightly so he wouldn't tower over her, and slowly, carefully, he signed, rusty but sincere, "Are you okay?" His hands moved awkwardly, but the meaning was clear. Eleanor's breath caught. She stared at his hands, at the effort, at the kindness embedded in each imperfect gesture. Tears welled again, but this time they were different. She nodded. Jack turned to the teenagers then, his voice calm but firm. "You're done," he said. "Put the phones away. Walk." One of the boys scoffed, trying to recover bravado. "It's just a joke," he said. Jack met his eyes, unwavering. "If someone's crying, it's not a joke," he replied. The silence stretched. The teens, suddenly aware of how small they were, shuffled back, muttering excuses, phones disappearing into pockets. Within moments, they were gone, laughter replaced by the echo of their retreating footsteps. Jack turned back to Eleanor. He picked up the fallen sandwich, brushed it off, then shook his head gently and set it aside. Another biker, a woman named Maria, slipped into the diner and returned with a fresh sandwich and a cup of hot soup, setting them carefully on a nearby table. Eleanor watched, stunned. She hadn't asked for anything. She hadn't expected anything. Yet here it was. Kindness offered freely. Inside the diner, the mood had shifted. Patrons who had looked away now watched with something like shame and admiration. The waitress came out, eyes wet, and placed a blanket around Eleanor's shoulders. Jack helped her to a chair, making sure she was comfortable. He introduced the group with simple signs and gestures, each biker offering a smile, a nod, a hand over the heart. Eleanor's hands trembled as she signed back, thanking them, her gratitude spilling out faster than her fingers could keep up. They stayed. They didn't rush her. They didn't act like heroes. They sat nearby sharing quiet stories, making sure she ate, making sure she knew she wasn't alone. Jack learned that Eleanor had been a seamstress once, that she still mended clothes for neighbors to earn a little extra. Maria promised to bring her a jacket with a torn lining next time. Another biker offered to check her heater. Simple things, real things. The emotional climax came not with applause or confrontation, but with a moment so small it almost went unnoticed. Eleanor reached into her coat and pulled out a faded photograph, her and her late husband on their wedding day. She showed it to Jack, her eyes shining with memories. Jack took the photo carefully, looked at it, then pressed it gently back into her hand and signed, "You are loved." Still. Eleanor broke down then, sobbing openly, her shoulders shaking as years of loneliness finally found release. Jack rested a hand over his heart and bowed his head, honoring her pain without trying to fix it. When the bikers finally left, the diner felt warmer somehow, brighter. Eleanor stood at the door watching them ride away, engines roaring back to life. The sound something she couldn't hear but could feel in her bones. She clutched the blanket tighter, smiling through tears. Inside her pocket was a small card with Jack's name and a promise written in careful letters. "We'll be back." The video the teens had filmed never went viral. It was deleted, forgotten. But another story traveled far that day, not through screens, but through hearts. The story of an elderly deaf woman who was seen, of bikers who chose compassion over indifference, of strangers who reminded everyone watching that kindness doesn't require perfection, only presence. Eleanor returned to Rosie's diner many times after that. Sometimes the bikers were there, sometimes they weren't, but she always sat by the window, wrapped in her blanket, sipping soup, smiling at the world. And when she caught someone staring, she didn't look away anymore. She held her head high, a quiet reminder that humanity still shows up, sometimes loud, sometimes gentle, but always right when it's needed most.